This session is being recorded. Thank you, Shan. So if you did miss any part of the presentation, you can always go back and watch it. Okay, let's start. So a few things I want to chat about. This workshop is going to be for those of you that are a little bit unsure or have questions on how to prepare for the upcoming Linked Key public speaking tournament. I'm going to be going over first a general overview of the tournament. If you were here for the seminar that I talked about, I believe it was last week or the week before, that information is going to be the same. What's not going to be the same is going to be how to prepare for all three categories. I'm going to walk you through all the different types of categories that we have, and then also how do you best prepare. So first tournament overview, then we're going to go to category 1, category 2, and then category 3. If at any point you have any questions during the seminar, I highly encourage you to throw your question in the chat and specifically directed at me. So you can choose who to send the message to. So for 2, just send it to my name. And then at the very end, I can quickly go over any questions that anybody has. Okay, tournament overview. So this tournament will be happening on December the 12th. From grades 6 to 12 can join. So we will be having a junior category. That is if you are in grades 6 to 8. So the junior category is basically a separate category where you can earn awards. All that specific information is in the tournament invitation package, which you all should have access to. So if you want more details for what the junior category means, all that is in the invitation package. If you want to join, it is $30 per speaker, and we will be having this online over Zoom on December the 12th. There are a bunch of really cool, interesting prizes if you are to do well at the tournament. So we have Linked Key credits. There are gift cards available for the students and also crypto, which is really exciting. All right. So there are 3 categories that we will be doing for the tournament. The first category is asynchronous. So I went over this in the seminar, but in case you missed it, what asynchronous means is that this category, your speech is going to be a video recording that is going to be submitted to us to judge offline. So if you're doing, so for category 1, you're going to record yourself over video. Then you are going to share that video with us, and the judges that we have are going to judge that. That is going to be before December the 12th. For synchronous events, that is categories 2 and also category 3, that is happening the day of. So it's happening December the 12th. So that's an important distinction to remember. And when you're thinking about video recording submissions versus online submissions over Zoom, there are different, I would say, tips and strategies that you will need to be aware of to make the best out of all of these categories. Okay, so before I get into how to prepare for category 1, I do want to go over a quick overview of what these 2 different category choices are, because how you prepare for it is going to be a little bit different based on what you choose. So first, in terms of for category 1, you can choose either to do an interpretive reading or you can do a solo acting submission. So whatever you choose is going to be up to you, but you cannot do both. So you either choose interpretive reading or you can do solo acting. So for both of these choices, you basically need to include the following. You have to include some kind of an introduction. So it's 1-minute introduction for what the piece you chose is called, why you decided to choose it. And I recommend that for everybody that is deciding to compete, to have a good reason as to why you chose the specific speech that you did. It could be because there is some kind of a value to you personally, maybe because in your life you really related to the main character in the story. It could be that it really relates to a problem that you're really passionate about. But there has to be some kind of a personal significant value of why you chose your piece. So you can't just choose something random, like you randomly go into a library and pick a book off the shelf. Ideally, this is going to be something that you have read before that you feel really strongly about. So that's the first part, is make sure you have an introduction of what the piece is and then why you chose the piece and how it relates to you. The second thing that is applicable to both is the length of the speech. The length of the speech is 5 to 7 minutes long, including the introduction. So I did get a question that was asking, will the introduction time be counted towards the total time? The answer to that question is yes. So your 1 minute approximate intro is going to count within the 5 to 7 minute long time period that you have to do either your interpretive reading or your solo acting. I highly recommend for all the students here, when you are practicing your speech, to time yourself when you are going through practice, because if you go either under 5 minutes or over 7 minutes, you will be deducted points if you are not in that time period. And the longer that you are outside of this range, the more points that you will lose. So for the first, let's say you're 30 seconds off, you will be deducted less points than if you were more than 30 seconds off. For the online events, I got another question in the chat, so let me read this. For the online events, are you able to or allowed to see a timer so you won't speak over or under the time? So you are allowed to use a timer. However, make sure your timer is not like visible within the frame of the video. Maybe you want to include a timer, like you have your phone, let's say in the corner of the desk. That's okay. However, be mindful that you are not allowed to, you should be having good eye contact with the camera. So if you are constantly looking at your phone that's in like the corner of your desk over here, you're going to be deducted marks. So when you are practicing, just make sure that you are aware of that. Okay, let's see. Next. So next is interpretive reading specific information. In terms of interpretive reading, what this means is that you are going to read from a passage in any kind of piece that you choose. So it has to be some piece of poetry, it could be from a novel, it can also be from a short story. Regardless, the piece that you choose needs to have some type of literary merit. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that means in the next slide. But the point of interpretive reading is you're literally reading from something and you're giving it your best shot to convey emotion and to represent the characters in your reading itself. So for this particular type of speaking, you actually are allowed to look down at your page and look down at your book that you're reading. In fact, you're encouraged to. So you don't need to memorize it. You're allowed to just have your book in front of you and then read from your book. That is okay. You're not allowed to have any props and costumes, however. So I do not recommend that you, let's say you're doing like a random book, you're not going to be dressing up as a character within that book. I do not recommend that. Just come wearing whatever you normally wear, have your camera turned on, and then just read from it. Alternatively, for solo acting, this is going to be a little bit different because solo acting is basically some kind of a memorized speech. It could be a memorized monologue from a play of some sort. So you could do Shakespeare, let's say you're doing Macbeth, that is allowed. You're basically memorizing something from the play and then acting that out as if you were that character. Because in solo acting, it is more drama focused, you are allowed to have props and costumes. It is not mandatory, but if you do want to dress up as that character, you are allowed to dress up as that character. So solo acting, more drama focused, interpretive reading, less drama focused. That's the difference between these two. I have a few other questions. If we're reading, do we need to make eye contact? I do recommend that you look up occasionally when you're reading. So don't just, do this in front of the camera and go read for the entirety of the 5 to 7 minutes. So do look up and make that connection with the audience occasionally. And then the next question that I have is, are we allowed to thread multiple cut videos together? The answer is no. So the video should be like one smooth video. There shouldn't be any editing on the video. You shouldn't have like multiple different cuts of the video. So let's say the beginning of your speech is like one shot, and then the ending of your speech is another shot. So it should be one smooth video from start to finish, no cuts allowed. All right, next. So this is going to be specific tips and tricks depending on which one you're choosing. Most of these tips are going to be applicable to both, and I will call out which ones specifically are not applicable to both. So first recommendation I have is to try to choose a piece that has literary merit. And this is what I was mentioning before on choosing something. So for interpretive reading, you're allowed to choose a novel, a short story, or poetry. But again, try to choose something that has literary merit. And what I mean by literary merit is basically by choosing pieces that have stood the test of time. So you might have heard the term classics in literature. A lot of the times, classics have tons of literary merit. These include basically stories that have complex characters. It has a story that provides some kind of a social commentary on how society works. Essentially, what I'm trying to say is try to choose a piece that you can learn something from. That's what literary merit basically means, is when you read the book or when you read the poetry, by the end of the poetry or the piece, you should have learned something from it. You should have felt emotionally different from the book. Don't choose something that is very simplistic. I think choose something that means something to you. Next recommendation that I have is how to pick what part of the piece to read. So for interpretive reading and solo acting, the time limit is 5 to 7 minutes. Because it is 5 to 7 minutes, depending on which piece you chose, that is not going to cover the entire story or the entire piece of poetry, which means you're probably going to have to pick a section of the book to actually read from. How you pick your section is going to be very important, because you don't want to pick a section like randomly in the middle, and then when you're reading it, it makes no sense to the listener. You basically want to pick a section where when you read it, there's some kind of a story within that section. The listener would be able to understand what is going on without much context as to what has happened before. So an example of what I mean is, if you're choosing a book, to pick a particular chapter that you think makes sense in it, like as a solo chapter to read. Or if you're doing solo acting, to pick a specific monologue from a play, and don't just pick something random within the middle of the play. So how you pick is very important, so that there's some kind of continuity within the story that you're reading from. Third is how some tips I have for video recordings for your speech. So for category 1, because you have to submit a video, there are certain things to be aware of when you are actually recording your video to submit. First is obviously to have your camera turned on. So it's very important you have your camera turned on so that the judges are able to see your body language, to see how often you have eye contact, and especially for solo acting, where it's a memorized monologue, it's very important to have eye contact for solo acting specifically. So make sure you have a good working camera that is turned on. Second tip is to make sure you have a working and clear microphone. So I know that some people have some kind of technical difficulty when they're trying to record a video. So it's good to practice and record a video first, listen to it back and see, am I loud and clear here? If you're not loud and clear, maybe try like a different computer, a different laptop, and see if that works a little bit better. But a clear working microphone is essential when you're doing a video recording. Third tip is to pick a clean background. This is not as important, but when you are speaking, obviously the most important thing for a judge is the content and how you say your speech. But there are certain things that you want to avoid that could be a distraction. So if, for example, if your background has a lot of clutter in it, if it's not like a simple background, it might be distracting for the listener, although what you will be judged on is going to be what you say and how you say it first and foremost. And last but not least, make sure that you are in a quiet place with minimal background noise. So make sure that when you're speaking and recording, you don't have like a vacuum going on in the background. You don't have like sirens going on in the background. That way it just makes it a lot easier for the judge to actually go in and listen to what you're saying, as opposed to focusing on all the distractions that is happening outside of you. Okay, let's see. Any questions on interpretive reading and solo acting related content? So I'm reading here, there's one question. Will there be a certificate for the top few? I'm assuming what you mean are the prizes. So there are going to be prizes for the top 3 overall speakers and also the top novice or junior speaker that is from grade 6 to grade 8. The specific prizes that will be awarded are in the invitation package. I don't have them off the top of my head, but it is going to be a combination of the linked key credit, the cryptocurrency, and also the gift card. Okay, next. Category 2 is happening on Zoom. So this is going to be not in person, it's going to be online, but on December the 12th is when it's happening. So you can choose here either to do a persuasive speech, or you can do an after dinner speech. So persuasive speaking or after dinner speaking, you cannot do both. So choose whatever you think resonates more with you, that you think you will do a better job for. So for both of these speeches, it is going to be 4 to 5 minutes long. Again, I encourage you to time yourself during practice and make sure you are within that time frame, because any time below or over the time frame, you will be deducted marks depending on how far off you are. You are allowed to bring 1 index card of notes. So 1 index card is basically like that big. You can write notes on both sides, and you are able to use your index card in case you forget where you are in your speech. Despite this being allowed, my recommendation is to try to avoid relying on your index card. In fact, both of these speeches should be memorized. So when you are practicing your speech, my recommendation is try to memorize as much as you can, so that when you're presenting on December the 12th, you can make good eye contact with the camera and make more connection to the judge or to the listener or to the audience. So that is my recommendation. Let's talk about persuasive speaking in particular first. So for persuasive speaking, this is a speech on a serious topic that is meant to persuade the audience of a solution to a certain problem. So essentially what you're going to do is you're going to write a speech. You're going to tell us, this is a big problem today, and then here is why, or here is how we should solve it, and here is why my solution is good. I'm going to be going over a little bit more detail of like the tips and the format of how to do persuasive speaking, but that is generally the goal of the speech itself. You are allowed to introduce some elements of humor, even though this is a serious topic. You can make it a little bit lighthearted, but do keep in mind that you generally do want to keep things more on the serious side. And then last but not least, no props. So that means you cannot bring in like an object that helps you prove something. Basically, it's just you and the camera, and that's it. Next, after dinner speaking. So for after dinner speaking, this is a speech that is a little bit less formal. It's supposed to be more lighthearted, more humorous. And that is because in the name, you are literally giving a speech after dinner. So everybody is, imagine everybody being well-fed, you're chatting amongst each other, and then you have to come up and give a speech to these people. So one important thing to keep note of is when you're giving a speech, there is going to be your imaginary audience. So the imaginary audience, as in the people that have just finished dinner, your imaginary audience could literally be anybody that you choose. It could be a company's employees, it could be conference attendees. So how you structure your speech is going to depend on, in your head, which imaginary audience that you picked up. As well, similarly, no props allowed, just you and your camera. I have a question in the chat. Do you suggest us to stand up while presenting or sit down at the camera? You are allowed to do either. Sitting or standing is fine. My recommendation is do whatever feels more natural and feels more comfortable to you. As long as you don't have any distractions in your video, as long as everything is appropriate, you can sit or stand. So a few pieces of tips for persuasive speaking. And then after this, I'm going to talk more about after dinner. So for persuasive speaking, you want to have a clear problem in mind. Remember, the goal of a persuasive speech is to convince the audience of why you have a good solution for the problem that you picked up. One thing, though, is just because there is a bigger problem that you chose doesn't necessarily mean that it is a good speech topic. So bigger problem does not mean better. In fact, there are a lot of speeches that I have listened to that have chosen problems that are on a smaller scale. And if you do a smaller problem, you also have the advantage of going a little bit more deeper and in more detail of exploring what that problem is. So try not to pick a problem that is too big, because remember, your speech is only a few minutes long, and a really big problem will require you to have a lot of explanation for that problem. So don't talk about, I don't recommend saying, how can we create world peace? Or the problem is, why is there not enough world peace? That is a really big problem to tackle. You want to choose something that is more manageable to you. So example of a few problems that you could tackle. Again, these are not, I would say, perfect problems. It also depends on what you're interested in, your knowledge of these things, because you do have to write a speech. So I do recommend you pick a problem or a topic that is at least somewhat interesting to you, that you're willing to sit down for a few hours to do research and then write out the speech for this. So example of a few problems that you can choose. One could be cell phone addiction, or you can talk about a specific element of climate change. These are all problems that you could write about and speak about for your persuasive speech. For our structure is very important, because this means having good structure basically means you have good organization within your speech. So first thing that you want to do for your speech is to have an introduction. In your introduction, you want to include the problem that you're trying to solve, and introduce it a little bit. So have a few interesting facts about the problem. Try to engage the audience with a hook at the very beginning. So something that's super interesting that will engage the audience attention. And then after you've done your introduction, then you want to include your supporting arguments. So you want to have 2 to 3 arguments supporting why your solution will solve the problem. This is obviously, how many arguments to include is going to be up to you, and up to how much detail you put in each argument. Because if you put a lot of detail in each argument, you're probably going to have less time to do more. So it all depends from a timing perspective. That's why I recommend to time yourself when you are going over these arguments and make sure you're within time. If you need to write more, you can always write more. If you're over time, I recommend that you cut out an argument or cut something from your speech. In terms of the arguments themselves, I recommend to follow this structure. This is an acronym that we use a lot in debate, but it is very useful for persuasive speaking as well. It is called PALE. So that means P-A-E-L. This is how you want to follow the organization for each of your arguments. So you first want to talk about the point, that's the P. Then you want to support your point with an explanation, which is your A, that's analysis. Analysis means explanation for your point. The E, you want to bring in an example to help support what you're talking about. And then the L is a link, which is a concluding sentence to tie everything back together. This format is going to help you a lot by making sure that what you're saying is very straightforward to the point, and you're not wasting any time going on a tangent. So if you're struggling and trying to figure out how to write something, follow PALE and it will help you along really well. After your 2 to 3 arguments, that's when you want to create a conclusion. So remind the audience what your problem is. Remind your audience what your solution is and why your solution is a good solution. And then conclude it out. This speech does need to be memorized. You are allowed your cue cards or your index cards that are like around this big. But again, the more that it is memorized, the higher the mark you are going to get because you have better eye contact with the camera. Sorry about that. The better eye contact with your camera and et cetera, et cetera. Any questions with persuasive speaking? I have a few questions in the chat. Let me take a look. Instead of doing a solution for persuasive speaking, can we do why we should kind of a thing instead of a solution? I think I'm a bit confused on what the question means, because to me, why we should do something sounds similar to a solution for me. So it's like, if this is a problem that exists, why we should do X, Y, Z, that seems to be some form of a solution. If you clarify a little bit, maybe I can answer your question a little bit better. The second question that I have is, do you recommend us to have facts or numbers in our speech? I highly, highly recommend that. In fact, I think having some kind of a statistic or some form of an example fits really well when you're doing PALE. So you want to bring in those numbers and those statistics when you're talking about an example. Great questions. All right, next, after dinner speaking. So after dinner speaking, as I said, is supposed to be more of a lighthearted and humorous type of speech in comparison to the very serious style of speech that is persuasive speaking. That being said, despite it being more humorous and more lighthearted, you still need to have something that you're trying to convince the audience of. So try to have a clear point in mind that you want your audience to take away from your speech while being entertaining. So it's more of a fun, lighthearted, persuasive speech. That's a way to think about what after dinner speaking is. So an after dinner speech is similar to a persuasive speech in the sense where you do need to persuade the audience of something by the end of the speech. However, it is done with a less rigid structure. So hopefully that makes sense. Very similar to persuasive speech, but more chilled, more relaxed, more fun. Because this has a less rigid structure, your speech should be very lighthearted. You have more freedom to basically structure your speech how you would like. I recommend to start off your speech with some kind of an anecdote, some kind of a personal story. Don't be afraid to tell jokes in your speech. And overall, your speech should have a very relaxed and positive atmosphere for the audience that you're choosing. Because of this, make sure that most of your speech focuses on positive content. So when you're telling a story, don't pick a story that is very depressing, that is very heavy. Again, it should be very relaxed and have a positive, create a positive environment. Last but not least, try to avoid offensive material. So you are allowed to have jokes, but make sure these jokes are not offensive in nature. So avoid content that is very targeted towards a specific race, avoid sexist commentary, make sure to be inclusive, all this stuff that everyone probably knows already. Same thing with the persuasive speaking. The after dinner speech does need to be memorized. So you can use your cue card, but again, try your best to memorize as much as possible with your speech. Okay, so that's after dinner speaking. Last category is impromptu speaking. Impromptu speaking is going to be very different from the other two categories, which is speaking on the spot. That's basically what impromptu speaking means, is speaking on the spot with very little time to prepare. So for the past two categories, category 1 and 2, you have tons of time to prepare. You can start preparing now. And if you've already started preparing, huge congrats to you for starting that early. But impromptu speaking, you basically have like no time to prepare. How it works is that you have 3 random topics. So you will be given 3 random topics. You do not know what these topics are going to be ahead of time. It could be words, it could be quotations, it could be phrases, it could be statements, literally it could be anything. You're going to get 3 random topics. Your job is to pick one of the 3 topics to talk about. Obviously, you want to pick something that is familiar to you, that you feel comfortable talking about. So don't pick something you have no idea what it means. Pick something that you're comfortable with speaking about. You will have 2 minutes to prepare. And within those 2 minutes, you're allowed to write as many notes as you want, but you're not allowed to do research. So no research is allowed, but you're allowed to write as many notes as you want, maybe how you want to structure your speech, some topics that you might want to talk about. And then after that, you need to throw your notes away, do not look at your notes at all, and speak for 4 to 6 minutes. That's impromptu. Other pieces that I want to touch upon is that you can interpret the topic however you see fit. So I'll give you an example in the next slide, but you can be supporting a topic, you could be against a topic, you can talk about a story related to the topic. So very much so, you have the freedom to organize your speech in a way and however you would like, but as long as it has a clear beginning, middle, and end, and a flow to it, that's what matters the most. Okay, few questions here. Is this similar to debate, or isn't it just like debate? It's similar to debate in the way where you have minimal time to prepare, but the actual speech that you give is not a debate speech. It could be a persuasive speech, but your speech has to have like a middle, beginning, and an end. It has to have examples in it. It has to be organized and stylistic. So it is similar, but has its differences. Another question I had is there any way to prepare it beforehand then? So there's no way to prepare beforehand. Your only preparation is the 2 minutes that you get after you are given the topic. So here are a few tips and tricks that I have for everybody here for impromptu speaking. As I said before, you are going to get 3 topics to choose from. So this is an example of what I picked. Obviously for you will have different topics, but your 3 topics could be cats would be your first topic. Second topic could be money makes the world go around. And then the third topic could be remote work. So working from home. Your job is, out of these 3, which one do you want to talk about the most? Which one do you feel most comfortable with? Pick the one that you feel most comfortable with, and then start to create your speech in your head, because you only have 2 minutes. So realistically, it's not possible to write out an entire speech. So I recommend to quickly write out some dot jots or some short notes and a few items of brainstorm that you want to talk about in your speech itself. Third item is have a key takeaway in mind. So again, you could be for a topic, you can be against a topic, you can have a lesson that you can learn from a topic. Regardless, by the end of your speech, the audience should have learned something that is your main goal or your main message that you want them to take away. So don't talk randomly about cats. Don't be like, there are brown cats, there are white cats, there are black cats. That is not the goal here. The goal here is to make sure that you have some kind of a takeaway for the audience at the very end. Structure is very important, and even more so in an impromptu speech because you have so little time to prepare. Make sure that you still have that introduction, your arguments, then your conclusion at the very end. Because a lot of people One common mistake that they make is that they'll talk randomly about an impromptu speech. They'll talk randomly about remote work or about cats. Don't talk randomly. It is better to have a plan, follow through with your plan, then end it than to talk and talk and talk about something that is unrelated. And last but not least, avoid filler words. Filler words are words that don't really mean anything, but people say to feel more comfortable speaking. It could be words like or ah or like. When you have an impromptu speech and you don't have that much time to prepare, I find that students tend to use filler words a lot more because they feel more uncomfortable speaking. When you're practicing at home, you could do random word generator and generate a word and then take 2 minutes and practice giving a speech. In your head, try to actively avoid saying these words because it is going to be a distraction for the judge. So we're almost done here, and I'm guessing based on the time, we might end a little bit early. So with the extra time that we have at the very end, feel free to ask any questions that you have and put them in the chat, and then we can go over it. So general public speaking tips. This is for any category that I just talked about. These are good habits to have in public speaking that you should be working towards. So first is have eye contact with the camera. Presenting online over Zoom is a very different experience than giving a speech in person, because in person, you can just look at the audience. But over Zoom, you're probably alone in your room with your laptop or computer. The most important thing is to locate where your camera is. So sometimes your camera is at the top of your laptop, sometimes your camera is somewhere else. Make sure you know where it is so that when you're speaking, you are looking at it, because that will give the impression that you're looking straight into the audience's eyes or into the judge's eyes, which will form a better connection with your audience. Second is volume. Make sure you are speaking loudly and that your microphone is picking up all of the things that you are saying in a loud and a clear way. So listen back to the recording, have a Zoom call with your friend or a Discord call with your friend and see how you sound. Am I loud enough? Am I not loud enough? These are things that will impact how you're scored. Third, no fidgeting. So stand or sit still. So fidgeting basically means some people that I see speaking, they'll do one of these with their chairs. So they'll talk like this and they'll move back and forth. This is very distracting. Make sure that you are speaking and sitting in a still way. You're not moving around a lot. You're not playing with your fingers in front of your camera. Make sure there's no fidgeting in your speech. Fourth, I talked about this already. No filler words. Don't say so, or like. There are other filler words out there, but try to make sure what you're saying is straight and to the point without any of these words that don't have much meaning in it. Fifth is tone. Tone is basically how you say something. Is it said in a way that invokes a sad emotion or a happy emotion? Make sure, and especially important when you're doing interpretive reading and solo acting, that your tone conveys what the character is feeling at that time. So tone's super important as well. Number 6 is don't rush. When you're giving a speech, and sometimes students, when they're reading, when they get nervous, they'll start to read and talk faster. Make sure to slow down, to take a deep breath, and to focus on the elements of your speech that is the most important. So when you're practicing, make sure you're speaking in a way that doesn't feel like you're going too fast, but also doesn't feel like you're going too slow. Number 7, be purposeful with hand gestures. So hand gestures is basically what you do with your hands when you are speaking. Over Zoom, I think most of the time we won't be able to see your hands, but occasionally, even I do this sometimes, like I'll use my hands to speak. That is okay as long as you're not overusing your hands. So every single time you move your hand in front of the camera, there should be a purpose behind it, and it should try to convey what you're saying is better. Some people like to use your hands like this just for the sake of using their hands. And then when they're talking, it just looks very distracting and it doesn't add any meaning to their speech if they're doing this. So be purposeful with how you use your hands during your speech. And last is a given, which is to practice as much as possible. Practice, practice, practice. The more you practice, the better your speech is going to be memorized, the more confident you are going to be when you are speaking. This is very important. It is not possible to practice too much, and practice as much as possible. Practice in front of the mirror, practice in front of your camera, practice in front of your parents, practice in front of the garbage can. Do what you need to do to feel comfortable delivering your speech. Okay, I have a few questions in the chat. These are all going to be online, right? So category 2 and category 3 are over Zoom. Category 1 is you need to record yourself, video format, then you submit the video to us, and then we will judge that offline. So categories 2 and 3 are online. Category 1 is you record yourself separately, and then you will send that in. The second question is specific for persuasive speeches, which is, can I just make arguments supporting an opinion without a solution? So unfortunately not. You need to include some sort of a solution in your persuasive speech. Where do I register for these topics? So I'm assuming what you mean is how do I tell you what you're going to, which piece you chose or which topic you chose? So you do not need to tell us which topic you chose until you actually give your speech. So when you give your speech, and especially for interpretive speaking, in your introduction, you need to tell the judge what book or what piece of literature you chose. So for example, my piece is going to be To Kill a Mockingbird by XXX. So the only time you need to tell us is when you're actually presenting. The other question is, how do you submit your video? So your video should be a Google link. So you should upload your video on Google Drive. Then you should share the link to your video to us on a Google form. There will be a Google form that will be sent out for all the people that registered. So I'll talk about this later, but the registration deadline is the 27th. After the 27th, you will get a link, if you've registered, for any kind, for how to submit category 1. Where will the Google form be sent out? The Google form will be sent out via email. So once you've properly registered for the competition, you will have been asked to enter in some kind of an email. The Google form will be emailed out to you. And then there are a few questions about the dates. So important dates. The registration deadline is November the 27th. That is on Saturday. So Saturday before midnight, you must register to receive all of the information that I'm telling you about, which is the Google form for how to submit category 1. Category 1 needs to be submitted by December the 3rd. So upload your video onto the Google Drive, share the link to the Google Drive, make sure that you have properly shared it, because sometimes if you share it, like people won't be able to access it. So make sure to change your settings to whoever has the link can view. And then the actual date of the tournament is happening December the 12th. So between December the 3rd to December the 12th, the judges will be judging category 1, submitting scores. And then the other 2 categories will be on December the 12th. How do I register for category 1? Do I need to register for this, to public speaking? You need to register on Linked Online for this specific tournament. This specific tournament, you need to do all 3 categories. So you need to prepare for category 1. You also need to prepare for category 2 and category 3. And the only way you're able to participate is if you go online to Linked Key Online, you register, you pay your $30, and then you submit all the required information. Another question is, on that day, how long is the contest going to be? How long will each bracket take? So I don't have the schedule with me right now, but it is on the invitation package. It starts early in the morning. I believe it's like 9 a.m. or something like that, and it will end sometime mid-afternoon. So morning to mid-afternoon is the approximate timing for this tournament, although specific times are on the invitation package. And obviously, with any tournament, there is possibility of change and delay. So do keep that in mind when you are participating on the 12th. Really good questions, everybody. So before we end off, I just want to make sure I have answered as many questions that you have. So if you do have any additional questions on anything that I talked about, please take this time to send them into the chat. I'm going to give it like 1 minute if anybody's writing questions. Okay, so it seems like nobody has any questions. Regardless, if you do, you can always reach us over email. For email, it is linkedkeyps@gmail.com. I will put that in the chat. And send any questions there if you have any. All right, wonderful. Thank you for attending, everybody. Have a nice day, and I'll see you hopefully at the competition.